going on from the research is that almost 60% of women maintained that their workplace actually had a diversity inclusion policy. They actually had a policy, all right? And yet we're seeing over 60% of women complain about experiencing discrimination in the workplace. So how are we arriving at such a dissonance between the theory and the practical if, organisations are supposedly doing the right thing, at least on paper? So Mariam, I'll ask you first.
Thanks, Destiny. Great point and great question. I'd say perhaps those diversity inclusion policies have failed to take an intersectional approach, and this is not necessarily uncommon. We know that increasingly corporate Australia is starting to take more of an intersectional lens, but it requires dare I say, those individuals in those organisations that are leading diversity inclusion initiatives to actually call that out. Often if that lived experience doesn't exist within, if that lens is not there, it often gets ignored. And we kind of applaud ourselves on, more broadly, our diversity inclusion initiatives. But often we ignore the fact that it's benefiting largely a specific cohort of women.
Can I just jump in there? Do you think that is predominantly because whenever we have, for the longest time in Australia, whenever we've discussed diversity, it has always been through a prism of gender? We haven't necessarily really explored the varieties of ways which include cultural diversity because that's just too hard.
Yeah, and while there are organisations that are starting to do that, I guess through my work at Diversity Council Australia, I see that there is more of an intersectional lens being applied now. It is long overdue, and it means that overwhelmingly there's this assumption, sometimes it's a ticker box approach of, right, we're doing gender equality, but there's a lack of ignorance around the fact that, when it comes to gender equality initiatives don't actually benefit all women, and there is a level of amplified disadvantage that women of colour in particular face. So I've been in my respective positions, whether it's in my day job or board positions that I hold or speaking engagements, I'm constantly trying to raise the level of awareness around the disadvantage women of colour face in particular. Brenda alluded earlier to her, reading the 100 pages or so of that report and how sobering and exhausting it is to face this. And it reminds me of some of the work I've done in the Islamophobia space, where I'd sit and read, 300 pages worth of reports around women predominantly and the experiences of Islamophobia that they face more broadly in society, and some of also in the workplace. And it is very sobering. It is very exhausting as the minority to continue to champion this cause and to continue to fight this. So that's why, while the acknowledgement needs to be that women of colour face an amplified level of disadvantage, the fight cannot and the burden cannot just rest on our shoulders.
Beautifully said. Pilar, did you want to contribute to that anymore?
Yes. Look, I think, thank you for that. I think, Mariam, your points are really important. First, I want to say that to celebrate and highlight the fact that we're here today and, a few of us have been in leadership positions is a strength, the testimony to women and the perseverance of actually being able to be in those positions of leadership and make way for others. I think it's really important to acknowledge that First Nations women and women of colour in this country, despite all the difficulties and against all the odds, we have made way.